Ideally, most of the development guidelines, where possible, should be supported by static analysis. Out of the 100 pages, there's probably a lot of those things that are very basic and can be enforced by Code Inspector or ABAP Lint.
Hello everyone, I'm Nestor Lara. Welcome to another ABAP Adventure. In today's video, we're going to talk about what is linting and how does it help you in your development. With us here today is Lars Hvam Peterson. Let's dive in.
Lots of comments, Nestor. So I think linting as such has been around in SAP for many years, but ABAP developers doesn't usually call it linting. Linting is a word that comes from the normal outside of SAP world. Inside SAP, like when you do a Control F2 syntax check in SE80, it does some kind of static analysis, right? So there's the extended syntax check, there's the code inspector, there's the ATC, and of course SAP keeps improving on that. And sometimes it's difficult to get exactly the same feedback, like when after upgrading a system. You might get more or less findings compared to a non-upgraded systems because features have been fixed in Code Inspector variants and more features has been added, right?
In some ways, I think maybe you can think of linting then as a spell check for your code, and then a peer review is someone making sure that whatever you wrote makes sense. Maybe that's a oversimplified way of thinking about it, but it might help for anyone who's not familiar with linting. What is the benefit of using something that is outside of the standard SAP tools offered?
Some years ago, 5 years ago, I started making this ABAP Lint project that runs standalone outside of the system. I like to have more reliable feedback, so not depending on the SAP version that you're on, but having a tool outside that gives exactly the same feedback. And moreover, ABAP Lint can run in standard continuous integration pipelines and does not require a lot of resources. So if you do continuous integration, spin up a new SAP instance, install the code, run Code Inspector, then that takes longer time than just running the linter standalone on the source files that are stored in Git.
I think about linting as syntax check plus. It is much better in validating that the code is correct without actually executing the code. It's also possible to run the linting just on the code itself. So on files, we're very used to all of the SAP code living within the system itself. But if you can detach the code through ABAP Git, push that to GitHub, run linting, then what that does is it enables you to run CI checks that will follow the order of least expensive to most expensive. If you know that something is wrong with your code through static analysis, that comes back to the developer can fix that before continuing down that CI pipeline of executing automated unit testing or peer review. Because the first thing you need to do is make sure that that code is ready for the next phase.
Yeah, and of course, so the reason why we want to do static analysis is to avoid having a lot of feedback loop in the peer review. So the peer review should, from my perspective, be more in that direction of, is this code human readable? Does it fulfill the functional requirements? Peer review is the most expensive, but also the most efficient and best way of sharing knowledge inside the company and ensuring that the code is actually correct, because computers cannot really do that yet, right?
I've been at a lot of companies where they have coding guidelines. You know, it's maybe a 50 to 100 page document that tells you exactly what the code should look like. But I don't think anyone actually enforces that correctly, just because it is very expensive for a person to go through every single line of code and make sure that it meets the guidelines, whereas computers are cheaper than people. And that can fairly easily be automated.
Ideally, most of the development guidelines, where possible, should be supported by static analysis. Out of the 100 pages, there's probably a lot of those things that are very basic and can be enforced by Code Inspector or ABAP Lint. Yeah, and of course, the team needs to define what language they write. Of course, you write ABAP, but there might be different rules that applies to the different teams and different things that are important for the architecture of the application that a team is working on, right? So linting and static analysis typically consist of a lot of different rules where each team can actually pick exactly what is good for their code base. And that's also where ABAP links that the configuration is stored in Git. So everyone on the team can suggest changes to the configuration and directly see the impact on the changes. And the changes to the configuration is also follows the same peer review as the ABAP source code.
And from a developer experience standpoint, now you're learning the same concepts that, maybe TypeScript, Python, or, any developer outside of the SAP space is familiar with. So if you are working on a project team with them, you're speaking the same language. You're able to communicate with them and understand them. And so not only is that streamlining the development process, but it's also streamlining the workflows within our project teams.
The static analysis can also be used to move the source code in a better direction, right? So set some targets to make the code HANA database compatible, make it S4 HANA compatible, and make it Steampunk/ABAP Cloud compatible. Just step by step, moving the code in a better direction so that you don't end up in like big bang implementations, having to change a lot of code at the same time, but that's slowly moving along.